The Curzon Line is the only border in the series drawn with genuine care for the populations it would divide, based on ethnographic survey, designed to minimize people on the wrong side of their national border, and it produced the most catastrophic consequences of any border in this series when it was rejected. The Polish-Soviet War, the Holocaust-specific geography, the Katyn massacre, WWII Eastern Front, the postwar ethnic cleansing of millions, the Cold War's European division, the Ukraine War. The most carefully drawn border in the series produced the most consequences when ignored. That is the series finale's central argument. Lord Curzon proposed his line at the Paris Peace Conference in December 1919. The line was based on the most thorough ethnographic mapping available, identifying where Polish-speaking majority populations ended and where Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Lithuanian populations began. It was the first serious attempt in the history of European border, drawing to place a border where populations actually divided, rather than where rivers ran or colonial negotiations produced compromise. The line was designed to minimize injustice. Poland rejected it, winning the 1920 war against Soviet Russia, and extended its territory far east of the Curzon Line, incorporating millions of Ukrainians and Belarusians into the Polish state. The careful border was replaced by a military one. Poland's victory in the 1920 Polish-Soviet War produced the Peace of Riga, a border that placed approximately 5 million Ukrainians and 3 million Belarusians inside the Polish state, far east of the Curzon Line. The interwar Polish state that resulted was the most ethnically diverse in Europe. Approximately 30% of its population was non-Polish, and managed this diversity through policies that ranged from benign neglect to active cultural suppression. The Ukrainian and Belarusian populations east of the Curzon Line were placed in a state that had not wanted them, and often made that clear. When the Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939 divided Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union, the Soviet occupation zone corresponded approximately to the territory east of the Curzon Line, the territory that ethnic mapping had placed outside Poland in 1910. The Katyn massacre, the NKVD's execution of approximately 22,000 Polish military officers, police, intellectuals, and landowners in the spring of 1940, was conducted in the territories east of the Curzon Line that the Soviet Union had occupied in September 1939. The specific targets, the Polish elite whose presence in the eastern territories represented Poland's claim to land the Soviet Union considered historically and ethnographically Ukrainian and Belarusian. The Katyn massacre was not only a war crime against prisoners, it was a specific territorial policy, eliminating the Polish leadership class in the disputed territories to prevent Polish reclamation after the war. The Soviet Union denied the massacre for 50 years. It was formally acknowledged in 1990. It has permanently damaged Polish-Russian relations in ways that are still visible in 2026. The territories disputed at the Curzon Line, Eastern Galicia, Volhynia, and Podolia, in what is now Western Ukraine, were the specific geographic location of some of the Holocaust's most concentrated mass murder. The Einsatzgruppen killing operations of 1941 were concentrated in these territories. The Baby Yar massacre, 771 Jews killed in 2 days in September 1941 near Kyiv, occurred in the Curzon Line's disputed zone. The Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec extermination camps were all located in what had been the contested territory between the Curzon Line and Poland's 1920 eastern border. The specific geographic concentration of the Holocaust death camps and mass shooting sites in the Curzon Line's disputed territories is not coincidental. It reflects the specific political vacuum that the disputed border's unresolved status created. The Volhynia massacre of 1943-1944, in which Ukrainian nationalist forces, the UPA, killed between 50,000 and 100,000 Polish civilians in the territory east of the Curzon Line, was the most violent expression of the territorial conflict that the disputed border had produced. The UPA's objective, ethnically cleanse the Ukrainian majority territory of its Polish population to prevent post-war Polish reclamation. The Polish population of Volhynia massacred in villages, churches, and fields. The Ukrainian nationalist position. This was Ukrainian land that Poland had occupied after 1920. The Polish position, these were Polish civilians murdered. Both positions trace to the same disputed border. Both are documented in historical record. Both are still producing diplomatic tension between Poland and Ukraine in 2026. Speech to describe the division of Europe between the Soviet-dominated East and the American-aligned West. The specific geography of the Iron Curtain corresponds approximately to the line between Soviet military presence and Western Allied presence at the war's end. The Curzon Line anchored the Soviet Union's western buffer zone, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria all becoming Soviet satellites. The territories east of the Curzon Line became Soviet republics: Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states. The Cold War's European geography was built on the Curzon Line's eastern foundation. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 produced the most consequential territorial change in Europe since WWII, and it produced it along approximately the same lines as the Curzon Line. The territories that had been east of the Curzon Line and incorporated into the Soviet Union became independent states: Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic republics. The territories that had been within the Soviet satellite system, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, became independent states that subsequently joined NATO and the European Union. The 1991 dissolution restored approximately the boundary that the Curzon Line had proposed in 1919 as the division between Polish majority and Ukrainian majority populations. The ethnographic border of 1919 became the state border of 1991 through 70 years of catastrophic violence. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine is the most active current consequence of the Curzon Line's century of contested history. The specific territories Russia has attempted to control: eastern Ukraine, Donbass, Zaporizhia, Kherson, include areas that were within the Soviet Union until 1991, and that Russia considers historically and culturally connected to Russia, rather than to an independent Ukraine. The western Ukrainian territories that Russia has also threatened, Lviv, the Galicia region, are the specific territories that were east of the Curzon Line and were the most contested between Poland and the Soviet Union in the interwar period. The war is being fought in the geography that the Curzon Line created. The specific military front lines of 2026 correspond approximately to the boundaries of the Curzon Line's disputed zone. The specific Poland-Ukraine dimension of the Curzon Line's legacy is the most diplomatically complex element of the Ukraine war's context. Poland, which shares the longest EU border with Ukraine and has been Ukraine's most important European supporter, simultaneously carries the specific historical memory of the Volhynia massacre and the postwar expulsions that the Curzon Line's contested history produced. Polish and Ukrainian soldiers fight on the same side against Russia in 2026, while Polish and Ukrainian politicians negotiate the unresolved historical grievances of the 1943-1944 Volhynia massacres. Two countries sharing a border defined by the Curzon Line are simultaneously allies and historical adversaries whose specific territorial and ethnic history has never been fully reconciled. The landscape that the Curzon Line crosses is the most historically dense in this series. A territory that has been inhabited, contested, and civilized for thousands of years. Lviv, the city that sits at the heart of the Curzon Line's disputed zone, has been part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and independent Ukraine. It has been called LWW Lemberg and Lviv, each name representing a different imperial civilization's claim. Its old town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contains architecture from every period of its successive civilizations: the Polish Baroque, the Austro-Hungarian coffeehouses, the Soviet institutional buildings, and the contemporary Ukrainian city. The most historically layered city in this series sits at the center of its most contested border. The Carpathian Mountains, running through the Curzon Line's disputed zone across the Polish-Ukrainian-Slovak border region, contain some of Central Europe's most extraordinary natural landscapes. The Bezady Mountains of southeastern Poland and western Ukraine, ancient beech forests, brown bears, wolves, and lynx surviving in the specific extraordinary biodiversity of Europe's largest primeval forest complex east of BIO. The Tatra Mountains, the most dramatic peaks in Central Europe, shared between Poland and Slovakia. The specific natural richness of the Curzon Line's territory, the landscapes that have witnessed every military and political catastrophe of the last century, is one of the most underappreciated in European nature travel. The lands most contested by empires often contain the landscapes least disturbed by development. The Curzon Line completes the series' argument with its most important and most counterintuitive addition. The previous 5 borders were drawn carelessly, in 30 minutes in 73 days with a grease pencil, with a ruler, and produced catastrophic consequences. The Curzon Line was drawn carefully based on genuine ethnographic evidence, with the specific intent to minimize injustice. And its rejection produced consequences as catastrophic as any border in this series. The series' complete argument, borders drawn carelessly produce catastrophe. Borders drawn carefully and then rejected also produce catastrophe. The lesson is not simply to draw borders more carefully. The lesson is that borders must be accepted as legitimate by the populations they divide, because legitimacy, not cartographic precision, determines whether a border produces peace or violence. 6 borders, 6 series episodes, Sykes-Picot and the Middle East, the Durand Line in Afghanistan, the Radcliffe Line in India, Pakistan, the Berlin Conference and Africa, the 38th Parallel and Korea, the Curzon Line and Europe's ongoing war. One pattern, borders drawn without the consent and acceptance of the populations they divide produce violence that compounds across generations until the legitimacy question is addressed, or the conflict exhausts the populations living within it. No border in this series has had its legitimacy question resolved. All 6 are still producing consequences in 2026. The series Borders Drawn in Bad Faith is complete. History in Progress continues. New series, new episodes. The same commitment to primary sources, documented evidence, and the specific honest examination of decisions made by real people in real rooms whose consequences fell on people who were not in those rooms. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. The borders are still there, the legitimacy questions are still open, and in the rooms where the next decisions are being made, the people who will live with those decisions are still not in the room. The series is finished. The history is not.